On today's show, we start off the new year with some Habs Prospects talk. We'll talk about Jakub Dobeš's shutout and a lot more on today's episode of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalakash, QMJHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects, with Sebastian High, USHL and Crossover Scout for Elite Prospects. And on today's show, we'll start off the new year with some Habs Prospects conversations. First and foremost, we have to talk about Jakub Dobeš, who became just the fourth goaltender of all time to get a shutout in his first game played. We'll talk about what makes him a unique goaltender, his style, his technique, what he's developed over the past couple of years in the AHL, and what kind of potential we're talking about here with Jakub Dobeš. That'll be the first segment. In the second segment, we'll talk about Hutson and Emil Heinman, the two rookies on the Montreal Canadiens, and how they're looking so far this year, how they're fitting into Montreal's system. Obviously, we all know about Hutson at this point. He's phenomenal. But yeah, we'll go into those details in the second segment. And then finally, in the third segment, we'll talk a bit more about the direction the Habs are taking in general. Talk about some trades that they made. We'll talk about what they do in the future in terms of potential trades, and especially what they're going to do with their 2025 pick. We're going to talk about where it's going to end up, all that good stuff. Before we get into any of that, though, just remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get started right away here with Jakub Dobeš, a late round selection by the Montreal Canadiens. One of those just throw a dart at the wall and just see what sticks kind of selection. That's what happens with goalies. And it took a while, and unfortunately with Caden Primo just not working out this year, he's just got waived for purposes of contract termination. Jakub Dobeš was the next man up, and he got called up and baptism by fire. The Florida Panthers in his first NHL game. And boy, did he knock it out of the park, eh?
He absolutely did. I mean, a 34-save shutout against the reigning Stanley Cup champions is quite the way to make your introduction to the National Hockey League, and he looked fantastic in this game. I think the first 5 minutes, we saw some quintessential Jakub Dobeš antics in goal. He was spinning around a little bit, the stick went flying. He's always been a bit of a chaotic netminder, but once he got settled a little bit more and that athleticism was a little bit more controlled, still some chaos in there, but definitely still pretty solid goaltending as a whole. And he got a lot calmer after those first 5 minutes, as he also said in an interview after the game. He was so solid in net. He saw every single puck. The Habs defense played one of their better games of the season in this one, it has to be said. Despite conceding 34 shots, so much of that was from the perimeter, with very clear sight lanes for Jakub Dobeš. There weren't that many super high danger chances that Florida was able to generate, and the ones that they were able to, Dobeš was more than equal to. So really, really good start to his NHL career, and certainly the best performance between either him and Caden Primo so far this season in the NHL.
I don't think it's even close. I mean, listen, I love Caden Primo as a person. Everything I've heard about him is phenomenal. But this was the best performance from the Habs backup goalie we've had so far this year. And it came in Jakub Dobeš's first ever start in the NHL. Phenomenal stuff from him overall. Let's talk about the style a bit, because he's a very, very unique goaltender. I mean, he's stylistically, he gives me emergency backup vibes, just all over the place. The pads are dropping early. He's very aggressive, very jittery in goal. I think a lot of that had to do with the nerves. From what I've seen in Laval, he's still erratic for sure. And you like your goalies a little bit crazy. That's somehow that makes them save more pucks. I don't know what it is, but when they're a tiny bit on edge, they get better. And Jakub Dobeš is definitely that. But what I really love about Dobeš stylistically is how flashy he is. He's old school. He'll do the windmill on the glove. He'll celebrate after saves. He's very, very unique. And I love that.
It's high event goaltending, which isn't the norm, but it's very fun.
100%. Very much old school goaltending there. But at the same time, as much as the technique's a bit all over the place, between the ears, this kid is really good, aggressive, confident, poised. he's got that ability to just make big saves and just absorb pucks, and it has a lot to do with positioning and sense, right? That's a lot of what makes Dobeš so interesting. And when it comes to that kind of goaltender, how much does goaltending have to do with technique, right? Like there's so much of goaltending that just has to do with just being a bit strange between the ears, and Dobeš definitely brings that to the equation, right?
He absolutely does, but he also brings a really high level of focus, and this was something very interesting that he was also talking about in his post-game interview after his shutout. That he has a mental coach and very much working hard on focus and staying in focus during the game, which is why he doesn't skate back to the bench during the TV breaks. He stays at his net in order to stay in that headspace, and I think it's very clear that this is a player who has worked very hard on that level of focus, and this is also a guy that for the past 5 seasons has had insanely large workloads in net. At first in the USHL in his draft year, he was splitting that year between the NAHL and the USHL. But when he was playing in the USHL, he was playing a lot with the Omaha Lancers. And then after being drafted, he played 47 games with Omaha, then 35 and 40 consecutively in the NCAA in his 2 college seasons. Yeah. Really heavy workloads. And then last year as well, 51 games in the AHL. He led all netminders in the entire American Hockey League in starts in his rookie season. And this season, he's also already up to 14 starts with Laval, 910 save percentage. This is a guy that is very used to that big workload and playing under stress and just being able to filter all of the noise out to be able to focus on the game. And that was something he did as well as I've seen so far in his career against the Florida Panthers.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious also to see how he kind of adapts to being the backup, right? Like, given how much workload he's been assuming so far over the past 3-4 years, like how easy is it going to be to play one every 4 or 5 games? But if he keeps performances like the one we just see up, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if the Habs give him more starts. One every 3 games, one every 2 games on some stretches. It wouldn't be surprising.
I could even imagine that the Habs would do a kind of like for some more flexibility in that, sending Dobeš back down to Laval for some spurts to get some starts with the Rocket, bring Primo back up when there's a spur of games where you don't want to start anyone other than Montembeault, and then switch them back in order to just keep him fresh and keep him getting those starts. I could see that happening.
Yeah.
Because again, it's kind of wide open what's going to be happening with Caden Primo now. Is there going to be a taker by trade? We don't know. At the time of recording, we don't know if he's been claimed, which I'd be surprised if he were after the start of this season. And again, of course, he could just be playing in Laval again, but I doubt that would last too long.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're talking about a prospect who genuinely has a lot of great qualities there in Dobeš. And, when you have a prospect of that quality who's able to kind of take that many starts, I mean, Sam Montembeault has had a ton of weight on his shoulder so far this year. The Habs really needed someone to be able to step in and kind of take that role and kind of pick things up from there. But let's talk about the upside with Dobeš, because there's some, I mean, how much can we kind of base ourselves off of one game, right? Like, I still think that Jakub Dobeš, yeah, right. Like, you don't want to set the expectations too high. You don't want to kind of have the fan base expect him to end up a start and then be disappointed if he's not. I still think he projects as a high-end backup goaltender. Yeah. I think that's really kind of the range of upside that we're talking about, mainly because of how sound he is mentally, how capable he is of handling huge workloads. But the technique is something that will eventually catch up to him. Like, yeah. he's still got the right post integrations, but it's not all there. Those scramble plays sometimes end up with huge gaps in net. But he's a big goaltender. He's a big body. He's able to cover a lot of ice. And we said this before regarding Jack Ivankovic. When you're a bigger goaltender, you tend to be able to save pucks you don't see. Yeah. As soon as you're a bit smaller, you really need to be able to see through screens in order to save pucks, because smaller limbs, smaller pads, smaller equipment, it's inevitable, right? But Dobeš doesn't have that problem, so that plays in his favor. But do you see a world in which Dobeš, kind of shakes things up and then ends up being the starter somehow for Montreal? I mean, goalies are voodoo, right?
Goalies are voodoo. We know this. I think that the presence of Jacob Fowler in the Habs system is going to be a bit of a wrench in that. Mm-hmm. Fowler, who may very well make the leap to pro hockey at the end of this season, if it's not now, it'll be pretty soon thereafter. Mm-hmm. He's going to be a really big contender with both like Dobeš and Montembeault for some starts with the Habs. I think between those 3 goaltenders, if you keep 2 of them, and kind of see how the chips fall between those players. I think that you have a pretty good tandem for quite a while, but Dobeš is probably the odd man out at the moment between those players. But I mean, if his NHL debut is anything to go off of, he's certainly going to give it his all to get a real foot in the door in the Habs crease.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a very interesting couple of years here moving forward for Montreal. We'll get into that a lot more in the final segment, but it's looking good for the Habs. Before I get into the next segment here, where we're going to talk about Lane Hutson and Emil Heinman, who've been having great seasons so far, just a quick word from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
The NFL playoffs are almost here, but it's not too late to get in on the regular season action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can finish the season off strong with $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel has so many ways for you to pick up the dub. I love betting on which players will score a touchdown and how many points each team will score. It is absolutely thrilling, and only more so once the playoffs actually arrive. Whether you want to take your swings on the NFL and American football, or on European football with the Champions League, the choice really is up to you. Or perhaps you prefer tennis or golf, or if you're listening to this podcast, just maybe hockey is your sport of choice. Whatever it may be, FanDuel has something to offer every kind of sports fan. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment here, let's talk about Lane Hutson and Emil Heinman, and we have to start with Lane Hutson so far this year. He's clawed his way up to the top power play. It took a lot to dislodge Mike Matheson, but inevitably, Martin Saint-Louis identified that Hudson is your best creator from the blue line there, and since being there, I mean, he's gone. I think he's on I think his second consecutive 5+ point game streak just ended. He had 7 earlier in the year. Now just ended a 6-game point streak in that 4-0 win against the Panthers. How far is this going to keep going? I mean, Lane Hutson just keeps exceeding expectations at every single level. It's what led him to slip to 62nd overall. People saw a 5'8" offensive defenseman, and a lot of teams were kind of turned off by that. The Habs identified a market inefficiency and exploited it. After that, people were wondering if he'd be able to do it in the NCAA. He exceeded expectations. Then the question was, can he do it in the NHL? And here he is. So how far is this going to keep going with Lane Hutson?
As far as he's going to take himself, it's gonna keep going up, in my opinion. I mean, in terms of production, I don't know how much more room for growth there is. I mean, this is a player with 26 points in 35 games from the blue line as a rookie, which is good for third in team scoring, only behind Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield. He's been fantastic for the Habs, but I think a lot of the growth that you're going to see from Lane Hutson is going to be in the things that aren't necessarily going to be on the score sheet every single night. On the defensive side of things, boxing out opponents, continuing to grow physically, resisting contact, and being stronger on his feet. These are all things that are going to keep improving. He's only 20 years old, and defensemen keep evolving until they're 25, 26.
Yep.
They have a longer progression curve than forwards do. So the sky is the limit with Lane Hutson. He's been fantastic so far. And I mean, in terms of power play quarterbacks, doesn't hurt when you have a player like Patrick Laine go out and tell the media that you're the best power play quarterback he's ever played with. Yeah. And this is one of the best power play scorers from the last decade in the NHL. Mm-hmm. Lane Hudson's a pretty special player, and he's been creating a bunch of scoring chances for his teammates, to the point that I know a lot of Habs fans are frustrated about the lack of finish at the end of the chances that he's creating, despite the fact that he's already logged 24 assists this season. So. Yep. So much to like here with Lane Hutson.
Absolutely. That's, I think, the most alluring part of all this is that Lane Hutson could have the double amount of assists that he has right now if the likes of Dvorak and Anderson and Gallagher and some of these guys were able to kind of finish at a higher level. Although Brendan Gallagher's been having a great season regardless, I still think that there's room for improvement in terms of he's setting up a ton of primary assists, primary chance assists, right? A ton of slot passes, a ton of cross-ice passes, really, really smart, deceptive, manipulative passes through lanes that just aren't connecting. Teammates are missing open nets. So it's so impressive to see this prospect, this kid, really. He's 20 years old, stepping into the NHL in his rookie season and just doing what he's doing is just absolutely phenomenal. But I think Emil Heinman also deserves some love for what he's been doing so far this year, and what a progression curve from him. When the Habs initially traded for him, I believe that was in the Toffoli trade, if I'm not
It
wrong,
was
right?
indeed.
Yeah. When they first traded for him, I saw a prospect who had a great shot, really good release, but didn't really offer much outside of that. He wasn't necessarily a high-end physical player in the sense that he had a big body, but didn't really use it all that well. And his main lacking was defensively. He struggled to identify back-checking lanes. He overskated his lanes. He was kind of trailing his feet, dragging his feet on the back check, that kind of stuff. And now it's like Emil Heineman is a great support piece in the bottom six there for Montreal, right?
He's been a fantastic fourth liner for the Habs. That fourth line with the Montreal Canadiens this season reminds me a lot of a fourth line that we saw during the Habs playoff run in 2021. Like so far this season, Jake Evans, Yoel Armia, and Emil Heineman have made a physical, defensively very solid, but also really dangerous off the rush on counterattack fourth line, very similarly to how Eric Stahl and Corey Perry and Yoel Armia functioned during the Habs playoff run. And I think Armia's definitely been rubbing off a little bit on his two line mates here so far this season. But yeah, as you mentioned, Heineman's come a really long way this year. And a lot of that is down to non-stop motor. The effort level has been irreproachable for Heineman this season. He's constantly moving his feet, applying pressure, initiating contact, going in on forechecks with just like reckless abandon and throwing the body around, which is what you want a player like this to be doing. And as a result of this intensity and motor on every single shift, he's been getting into goal scoring positions where his shot has just been shining. And one element that I know both of us had critiqued in Heineman's game for a couple of years, actually, is his ability to catch pucks. That is no longer a weakness now at the NHL level. He's been catching pucks really quickly, getting his shots off in little space, and he can find those very tight seams with significant ease, actually. And he's been fantastic. He's sitting tied for sixth in rookie scoring. He's tied with Cutter Goetze. He's ahead of Will Smith. Fantastic start to the season here for Heineman, and he's been doing this averaging around 10 minutes a game. So even if he were to get a bit more ice time, you could even see that production increase in terms of like per 60 goal scoring. I believe he's like top 5 in the league or something absurd. He's pretty high up there in per 60, 5-on-5 production, but it's been a great start. But talk me through what elements of his game are what have made him this effective this quickly, because last season in the AHL, he was hovering around half a point a game with Laval. Didn't look like a massive standout. Looked like he may have been stagnating slightly in his development, but that has changed absolutely now after the summer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Adam Nicholas worked a lot on him on that specific thing. The ability to catch a puck in motion and stride, not need to slow down or look at his feet in order to catch a puck. That's really changed a lot in this game because, like you mentioned, like transition plays has mainly been how Emil Heinman has been impactful offensively so far for the Montreal Canadiens. And you can't be an impactful transition player if you constantly have to slow down or look down or anything else really in order to catch a puck in motion and skate it up the ice. So that improvement has unlocked a ton of transition offense because Heineman's shot is an absolute bomb. He's able to rifle shots really quickly. He's able to set up his hip pocket incredibly quickly and just massive downforce, massive torque on that shot. And it just flies off his stick. Not with accuracy, yes, but mostly it's about power with Heineman. He just beats goalies clean to their posts when he's shooting cross body, right? So that's been the major improvement in my opinion. And all the improvements that we talked about, not stopping to move his feet, the improvements in his physical mechanics, leveraging his weight, getting under opponents' hands, moving their stick out of the way while pivoting through a check. All these are Adam Nicholas staples in terms of what he teaches his prospects. So Emil Heineman's improvements and his ability to become an impactful fourth liner for Montreal has Adam Nicholas written all over it. And I'm very, very happy with that because the main issue with Montreal for the longest time was prospect development. They would draft good talents, and then those talents would just not develop in the ways that they should. And so far, since Adam Nicholas has joined this development group, that's been turned around completely. We've seen improvements in Hutson's game. We've seen improvements in Heineman's game. And even some of the support cast, Caden Gooley's gotten a lot more poised on breakouts. Like, there are so many
Even
prospects.
Josh Anderson has completely changed his game into being a really effective bottom six checking winger rather than a even strength black hole of a power forward.
Absolutely. So, when it comes to Hutson and Heineman, the improvements in their game continue to be highlighted. Hudson, the innate talent's always been there. He's gotten more effective. Heineman, there are actual tools that are improving. So it's different trajectories for both of them, but I think both of them are headed in very much the right direction. But that's our second segment done. We'll get into our third segment. We'll look at in a bit larger scale for Montreal. Where are they headed? What have they been doing so far that hints to where they're heading in terms of their trajectory? And especially, what do they do with that 2025 NHL draft pick? We'll talk about all that in detail. But just before, a quick word from our sponsors over at GameTime. If you're looking to buy cheap tickets last minute to any event, GameTime is the best place to get that done. GameTime is safe, secure, and super easy to use, and they're absolutely obsessed with saving you money. I mean, they have savings at every step of the way. They have flash deals, zone deals, last minute deals, and they even have the GameTime guarantee to always make sure that you get the best price for your tickets. My schedule changes around a ton, so I can find myself in an afternoon free out of nowhere. So it's really really easy for me to just pull up GameTime, see what events are in my area, and just go to any event last minute. They have tickets up until the last minute before events start, and sometimes even an hour after they start, you can still get tickets over at GameTime. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, super simple. You just create an account and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. So download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so let's close things off here with a bit of a more larger scale view on which direction the Montreal Canadiens are taking here for the future. And I think we could start with the trades that they've been making so far to kind of hint at what they're trying to do here with the future trajectory of this team. I think the most recent trade hints very well at that. Alexandre Carrier being traded for Justin Barron 1-for-1. That was an interesting trade with, I think, hinted at their ability to sometimes just say enough is enough and just cut their losses when it comes to certain prospects. After the Lehkonen trade, there was a lot of hope on Barron and what he'd be able to do. I think the Colorado Avalanche came out very much winning that trade. And at 22, 23, there was this idea that, Justin Barron's still relatively young. Some defensemen can develop on the late. We were talking a bit about this before the episode. Every defenseman that doesn't develop, well, was 22 or 23 at some point, right? So just a matter of kind of anticipating and predicting which defensemen are going to be developing on later on and which won't. And so far for Justin Barron, it hasn't looked good. And I think the addition of Carrier makes a ton of sense for Montreal, right?
It absolutely does. And even looking back at that Lehkonen trade, the hope there was to acquire a future top four defenseman. Not a top pairing guy, but a second pairing solid piece in Justin Barron. And then they just ended up flipping him for a player that can play a very, very solid role in a top four capacity. Alexandre Carrier has been excellent so far with the Montreal Canadiens. He's not nearly as flashy as Justin Barron is with the puck on his stick. He doesn't have the same booming shot, doesn't have the mobility at that level. He's still a pretty good skater, and he doesn't have like the flashes of handling either, just unlock defensive structures and get into those high danger areas on his own. But he is a player that his teammates can rely on, which is the exact inverse of what Justin Barron had been with the Montreal Canadiens. And so far, the chemistry building between Alexandre Carrier and Caden Gooley has been wonderful to see. You have an actual cohesive top four at this point in Montreal, where you have the offensive force with Matheson and Hudson, as well as a really solid two-way pairing and a good matchup pairing against opposition's top lines with Gooley and Carrier, with two mobile, pretty physically solid players. Even though Carrier isn't the biggest, he has good physical habits. He doesn't let himself get boxed out. He's really solid on his skates. There's a lot to like with this player. And as you mentioned, I think it goes a long way to kind of tell the story of a Montreal Canadiens team that's actually looking to improve the current lineup rather than just build for a future 2, 3, 4 years away. And Carrier might still be there at that time. He signed for 3 years at $3 million. He's going to be here for a while, and especially as a potential David Savard replacement who could be going at the deadline, I think it was great business for the Habs here. But to move on to the next thing here, Patrick Laine has reinvigorated the offense for this team. You want to talk me through his impact on the power play and just on morale in general to have a player with that kind of tool in your lineup every single night?
Absolutely. You have a game changer on the half wall in the power play. He's just revolutionized the Habs power play there, the top power play unit, and just made it even more lethal. Having that option of just a guy who can just get him the puck and he'll shoot it and it'll usually go in. Like that's something that's very morale boosting for the Habs. I think that's been a great addition. It also hints at something else on the Habs side. Like they're looking to bolster the overall talent level in their group. They're not looking to just, 4 or 5 years from now, what are we going to be? They're also looking at it right now. What's going to help us build right away? What's going to help us build momentum and be a better team and learn to win? So these kinds of trades make a ton of sense. And that's actually why I think they're probably not going to be moving Jake Evans. I think they're probably going to be resigning, and mainly because he's a veteran presence that is very consistent, very efficient. I think what ends up happening is Jake Evans and Owen Beck will be sharing responsibilities at some line at some point. They're going to be sharing faceoffs. Beck will probably start off on the right wing next to Evans, and the two will kind of switch up on faceoffs in some games, that kind of thing. But I think Jake Evans is, especially the way he's playing right now, he's a necessary piece for the Montreal Canadiens. He's been offering support offense, consistent defensive minutes, always winning faceoffs, always doing the right things. Having that veteran presence on your team that's gone through hell for your team, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Evans is, especially having a veteran at the time of the 2021 playoff run, be able to offer that experience to guys like Owen Beck. I don't think the Habs are moving Evans. As good as Beck has been, and I think he could play in the NHL right now in a bottom six capacity, I think Evans is better off. The Habs are better off with Jake Evans in the lineup as well.
Yeah, very possibly. I think it's gonna be very interesting to see what the Habs do with this player, because I think it'll go a long way to kind of tell how they feel about their current lineup. Because if they get an offer of a first round selection for Jake Evans, a player who is shooting 29% this season after a career average of 8%, the puck has been really just going in very easily for him this year. He sits on 4th in team scoring, which is insane because he's still been playing on the 4th line throughout this entire stretch. He has 22 points in 35 games. And the nice thing, I think, with the Habs position here, I don't think there's a wrong decision here necessarily. I think if you cash out, you have young players in the wings that are defensively responsible, can play that kind of role. It will take them 2-3 years to get to the level of Jake Evans to be able to be trusted against like top matchups in the NHL. But you have players there to play that role, or you hang on to him, give him a contract, pay him some money. A bit more than he's been making these past couple seasons, and perhaps that contract doesn't age the best at the last year or two of it, but you're getting, as you mentioned, a loyal servant who's been so effective at 5-on-5 and the penalty kill, such a versatile and important piece for this team who always just plays reliable minutes when you send him over the boards. So I don't think there's a wrong decision here, but it'll be very interesting to see what the Habs do at the deadline with him. To finally wrap up the show here, we have to talk about the first round pick this season, because it's a high-end draft class at the top end. The top 5, top 7 are really, really good in 2025. Where do you think the Habs are going to land? And do you want to maybe brainstorm who they'd be interested in at that slot?
I think step one is just to look at the slot where they're going to end up. I think more likely than not, we're talking about a 6 to 12 pick from Montreal. I don't think they're going to end up in the top 5 unless they win the lottery. They're not going to be in the playoffs consideration, so that eliminates that side of the range. But I think the Habs, especially with the way Laine and Evans and these guys have been playing in this last stretch, with Lane Hutson racking up points, they're going to win a couple games here and there and place themselves in the 6 to 12 consideration. I'd be looking at, Victor Eklund is small, but man, is he tenacious. He's a type of player who has a contagious level of energy. Another prospect I'd be looking at in terms of identity, what the Habs are trying to build. Carter Bear is the perfect Brendan Gallagher replacement. I cannot think of a more fitting replacement for Brendan Gallagher than Carter Bear. And he has the additional ability to make plays in transition, that playmaking skill, that handling skill to bolster that. I think he's close to a top 10 pick Maybe not on draft day. Some teams are not as sold. But in terms of talent, he could be a top 10 prospect in this class. So if they can pick him up in the 10 to 12 range, if they end up with that type of selection, that would make a ton of sense. If you want to go for another defenseman for some reason, listen, Jackson Smith.
I was going to say.
there are decent picks there. I don't know how many left shot defensemen the Habs can rack up before.
But Jackson Smith would be a fantastic fit. Throw handedness out the window.
Yeah.
You're getting a player with fantastic rush defending skills. He's 6'3", elite level skater, and high end offensive upside. Just play him on his weak side. It's no problem.
Absolutely. So yeah, there's a couple fits there, but I think the Habs would benefit from a top end talent at forward as well, who can bring energy. For me, that's Eklund and Bear. If they're looking for a bit more size, Bear. If they're looking for a bit more skill than Eklund in terms of upside, if they want another top 6 potential prospect, he's right there. So those are my picks, and they fit really well into the identity the Habs are trying to build: fast, skilled, but also energetic and pacey. Right. So, is there any other prospect you have in mind for the Habs in this range?
I think like more of if the Habs finish the season off worse than we're expecting here and do get a pick in that like 4 to 6 range, then you're looking at players like Michael Misa, who would be the perfect fit. Like Suzuki Misa long-term center combo, and you're pretty much set down the middle. Yeah. Apart from that, Roger McQueen would also be very interesting. Another really skilled centerman. He's going to need a couple years to develop, but the Habs had that patience. They have time on their side in that sense. And I think that if you can get a player like that, if you wanted Caden Lindstrom last year, you missed out, and you want to get a stylistically comparable player this time around with really, really good hard and soft skill, that's your guy. So a lot of options at the top end of the draft. Not really many ways to mess the draft up, I think, if you're drafting in that range. There's so many players that are right in the mix that are high-end talents. So a lot to look forward to for the Montreal Canadiens. But for the time being, let's just be happy that they're actually winning some games for the first time in seemingly half a decade here during the last little stretch. But I believe that wraps up the show, right, Hattie?
It does, absolutely. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe. Let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please leave us a rate and review and make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, remember to check out Locked On Sports Today. They've got all our news and updates about what's going on around sports. And remember to check in with us as we continue our prospect coverage for the month of January. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian High. Happy New Year. We hope you tune in next time.